The whole area was sprayed with something and partially bandaged. Well, he looked great. It would have killed you or I. He was given a lift back to the village, and the proud possessor of 6 5-grain aspirins, and he was told to return in 2 days' time for a fresh bandage and M&B powdering. As Dr. Gould had to reach Mbeya that night, he would only stay for a well-earned drink, and after a cordial handshake went on his way. The patient didn't turn up in the 2 days as instructed, so I sent a driver to go and inquire. Well, he returned with a message from the man's wife to say that he was working in his garden, but that he would be coming. Well, he did the following day, with a chicken and some bananas to thank me. The bandages had been replaced with a garland of some sort of evergreen leaves, and the flies were still enjoying regular meals round the weeping stitches. I treated the whole area with M&B powder and suggested he throw away the Roman garland, but he wouldn't hear of it. I saw him on odd occasions after this, and apart from obvious scarring, he seemed as right as rain, and probably still is. Well, now I must tell you a simple tale of indiscretion. I was proposing to open a beautiful mountain stream for licensed tourist trout fishing in November 1954. I was well pleased with the week of bank clearance by a team of local villagers under the direction of Peter Yatima, who was now accompanying me on a tour of inspection in his bare feet and well-washed khaki uniform. I'd spent the earlier part of the afternoon testing the sporting qualities of the trout, which I had introduced as 6-inch Kenya stock some 2 years previously. They had progressed very well, and Yatima was carrying one of the about 2 pounds which I proposed to eat for my supper on return to the fishing camp, which was some half-mile downstream. We came to a small sandy beach overlooking a wide shallow stretch with a few very large flat exposed rocks. Curled up on one of these flat rocks some 12 yards distant was one of the biggest python I'd ever seen. It looked like a huge pile of variegated elephant dung. It was obviously enjoying the late afternoon sun. Well, I should have known better and left it alone, but was curious to know just how long it really was. And I cast my small double-hook silver doctor fly upstream of the boulder. And the line swung round and up onto the boulder and under this huge reptile, which didn't move off as intended. The result of my folly was a well-hooked and extremely volatile 16 feet of python, which made straight for the beach that we were standing on. Naturally, you would like to know how a senior ranger and his head game guard dealt with this alarming confrontation. The rod and the fish were dropped, and both of us were well on our way up the path before either touched the ground. After a very undignified dash of some 20 yards, it was obvious that there was no pursuit, and some dignity was restored to the proceedings. The knowledge that a python is not an aggressive snake fails to put lead in your pencil in these circumstances. I now sent Yatima back to the fishing camp to collect my shotgun and a few cartridges. He returned shortly with the shotgun and a bandolier of .375 bullets, so back he had to go. On his return, we made our way cautiously back to the beach. The rod was still there, and so was the fish. It was now clear that this hooked snake was travelling some considerable distance, as the backing to the fly line was just showing in the rod rings. That meant about 20 yards. Yatima followed close behind me with the gun while I slowly wound in the line, looking cautiously to the left and to the right and just ahead, when it was obvious there were only a few yards of line and cast remaining. Yatima took the rod, I took the gun, and we very slowly inched our way forward to the climax. There was nothing on the end, not even my precious silver doctor. You may be curious as to how I knew that this huge reptile was 16 feet long. It was found some days later by local villagers lying torpid, digesting a large domestic pig. Unfortunately, it had been badly damaged by their spears and pangas before Yatima arrived on the scene. But he proudly returned the silver doctor fly, which he had spotted embedded in its skin. In actual fact, it measured a fraction over 16 feet. Python are very good to eat and taste just like chicken, just in case you're ever lost and starving in the jungle. Well, by now you may have gathered that I do not have much sympathy or affection for crocodiles. A bit of a phobia, perhaps, just as spiders or snakes repel some people. It was late November in 1960 when I received a message from the village headman on the Rukuru River asking for my help, as there had been several crocodile attacks on members of his village. I knew the area quite well from past problems with lions and village cattle. It was also a good time to deal with this kind of problem, as it was the end of the dry season and the rivers would be very low, which would make it easier to cull the offending crocodiles. The river was barely 20 yards wide at low water and a good 50 yards at high level, when it ran a brick red, a dull jade at low water. My vehicle had been adapted for camping with adequate ventilation and mosquito proofing. I duly arrived at the troubled area and parked just below the skyline, so I was not visible from the opposite bank. There were women and children washing pots and paddling right in the very area that they had been attacked. A strange fatalistic attitude that is beyond comprehension, which makes Africa so unique. No doubt they were all adorned with special amulets and charms. Well, I was soon surrounded by a small voluble crowd of misleading experts and witnesses. The number of crocodiles inhabiting that 100-yard-long pool varied from 5 to 50, and their sizes from a reasonable 3 paces to an unreasonable 20 paces. The village headman was now on the scene and was able to reassure me that there were probably 4, 2 about 7 or 8 feet, and 2 very large. He now ordered everyone to do their washing and water collection at another site further upstream, and to stay clear of the immediate area until further notice. Why now, I asked myself, but that's Africa. As soon as all was quiet, I had a look at this dull green 100-yard-long pool, which was headed by rocky shallows and ended in the same way. I had brought a departmental .404 Vickers rifle with me, a veritable cannon of a gun, but very accurate. I'd also brought Chilongo, one of my African hunters, a grizzled little man whose game department hat came right down over his eyes, and I often wondered how the hell he ever saw anything. But he was a master tracker and apparently always slept in the bush. I had brought him along for pest control in the local village maize gardens, where they were having trouble with pig and baboons in the very early hours. He was also to supply me with suitable decoy bait for the crocodiles. At night I lay and listened to all the marvellous hoots, grunts, groans and splashes that fill the African night near rivers. I fell asleep wishing the incessant drumming from a nearby village would cease. I woke at first light. It was cold and all was still, with a faint mist rising off the river. I made myself a huge mug of tea with condensed milk and walked to the river bank. I could see new crocodile drag marks on the sandbank just across the river. Chilongo arrived silently and early, with 3 dead baboons and a large pig, which was being carried by 2 locals. It was covered in ticks and looked disgusting, so I told them to keep it, which they very happily carted off to the nearby village. I told Chilongo to cross the river higher up and place the 3 baboons together in an upright position on the sandbank opposite, very near to the water's edge. The upright stance was obtained by placing pointed bamboo sticks under their chins and embedding the other end in the sand. They looked very realistic, and Chilongo returned and left to resume his crop protection duties. I had my breakfast, loaded the Vickers rifle, and went over to the river bank. I was about to take up my prone position when, not 40 yards to my right, was a giant of a crocodile plodding his way towards me through the shallows at the head of the pool. The crocodile has a very small brain, set about 6 inches behind the eye and just below the eye. They're never very easy to kill, and certainly I didn't want a moving target. So I raised myself boldly, holding the rifle above my head with both hands, and then lowered myself quickly onto one knee. Well, this had the desired effect. He stopped and lowered himself on his belly, giving me long enough to take careful aim behind the eye. He was now less than 30 yards from me. The recoil from that cannon of a gun was a bit shattering, but the shot was true, and this huge beast reared up and fell over on its back, and after lashing its enormous tail for a few seconds, it drifted across the shallows and came to rest against two small boulders. Well, it was not quite as long as I might have said it was if it had escaped, but 14 feet 5 inches is still a very big crocodile. The shot had awakened the interest of the villagers, who cautiously approached on sighting the dead crocodile. One of them sprinted back to the village, and we shortly had half a dozen rather torpid blanket-clad spectators. This was shortly followed by the usual female yodeling, and eventually the scene was reminiscent of a wildebeest herd on migration, as they plunged down the bank, chanting as they hauled this huge crocodile to dry land, and occasionally dealing the dead body brave blows with feet and boulders. Crocodiles are not popular. Well, it was a good hour before this some peace and order returned to the scene, and eventually my truck began to look like a mobile greengrocer's, from the very small gifts of eggs, bananas, chickens, etc. By late afternoon, heavy cloud was overhead, and it was very humid, and the rains were coming, and that would curtail my activities. I returned to my vigil after supper, and was annoyed to find 2 of the decoy baboons had been taken, and the 3rd was lying partially in the water. My continued vigil was eventually rewarded, as the familiar gnarled lump appeared in the margin water some 6 feet from the remaining decoy baboon. As soon as the head was sufficiently exposed, I pressed the trigger and gave myself another dose of concussion from that .404 Vickers rifle. A dramatic backward arc, and the crocodile disappeared into deep water. It had to be a fatal shot, but the light was now fading fast, and there was nothing further one could do. Well, during the night there was lightning in the mountain behind me, and distant thunder. Imminent rain and a full river were almost a certainty within the next few hours. Chilongo arrived at dawn, having come to the same conclusion. I told him about the crocodile, and he went to have a look round while I packed up for departure. He returned very shortly to say the crocodile was dead at the end of the pool, so I went to see. There it was, lodged against the boulders at the shallow outlet, just like the first one. Unfortunately, it had been rather badly mauled by some predatory visitors during the night, and it didn't look its best. There it was, 9'9", of merciless eating machine. Chilongo simply repeated "afisi, afisi" several times, which means hyenas. I left a message for the village headman to say that I would come back at the end of the next dry season, and left Chena with Chilongo as quickly as possible, as the rain had started in earnest, and my Plymouth Concorde didn't have 4-wheel drive. The crocodiles always struck me as a totally unnecessary addition to the African scene, and should have really gone out with the dinosaurs. I know my director would disagree with this opinion, but if he had been with me and my companion at Lake Kazuni the previous year, and watched my companion's Labrador retrieving a spur-winged goose, and then seeing both being silently engulfed by a huge pair of jaws, perhaps he might agree. Well, I share the African's intense dislike of these creatures.